In a quiet town in Ohio, where the wind whispers through old sycamores and life moves at the pace of familiarity, there stood a Wendy's on the corner of Maple and Ninth. It wasn't a special location, just another fast food restaurant in this endless chain of American drive-thrus. But inside that store, behind the register and under a faded red cap, worked a man named Henry Dawson. At 42 years old, Henry was not where he expected to be in life. Once a skilled mechanic with his own garage, the recession and a series of personal tragedies had stripped him of everything: his business, his home, and the confidence he once wore like a snow. He clocked in every morning at 6:45 a.m., arriving early enough to wipe down tables before the breakfast crowd trickled in. His hands, once stained with oil and grease, now smelled of fryer oil and floor cleaner. And though the world barely noticed him, Henry noticed everything. He smiled at rude customers. He covered extra shifts when teenagers flaked. He never complained. Not when a manager raised their voice, not when customers mocked his age, not even when his worn shoes soaked through with snow in the winter. But behind his tired eyes was a quiet fire. Henry was not broken, just bent. Every humiliation, every scoff, every quiet judgment was fuel. This wasn't the end of his story, not by a long shot. He had a past people had forgotten, and a future they would never see coming. This is the story of how one man, overlooked and underestimated, turned a job at Wendy's into the spark that reignited his life and taught everyone around him the true meaning of dignity, perseverance, and redemption. It was a Thursday afternoon, and the lunch rush at Wendy's had hit its peak. The line stretched to the door, voices echoed in overlapping conversations, and orders flew from the monitors faster than the crew could catch up. Henry was working front counter, as usual, calm and patient even in the storm. He moved with quiet efficiency, wiping sweat from his brow as he handed out trays and apologized for delays he didn't cause. Then they walked in, a pair of young men in their 20s, loud, well-dressed, and clearly used to being the center of attention. One of them wore a Rolex that flashed under the fluorescent lights as he pointed mockingly at the older man behind the counter. "Yo, check it out," he said to his friend, loud enough for others to hear. "That's got to be the oldest fast food worker in America." "What happened, Grandpa? Missed the retirement memo?" The friend laughed. Several people turned to look. Some smiled uncomfortably. Others looked away. Henry, cheeks warm, simply smiled and replied, "Welcome to Wendy's. What can I get started for you?" But they weren't done. "Nah, for real though. You got kids? How do they even look at you, man? Flipping burgers at your age, that's tough." Henry kept his composure. "I'm just here to do a good job. Let me know when you're ready." They finally placed their order, extra slow, extra mocking, before sitting nearby and continuing their jokes loud, enough for everyone to hear. The worst part wasn't the words. It was the silence from the room. No one stood up for him, not even his manager. In that moment, Henry felt smaller than he had in years, not because he believed the insults, but because of the way the world seemed to agree with them by doing nothing. He took a break 10 minutes later, sitting in the employee area with a lukewarm cup of coffee and a quiet stare. He thought about his old garage, about his late wife's smile, about everything he used to be. The pain wasn't just about today. It was the culmination of years of quiet struggle. But even in that silence, something inside him stirred. Not rage, not shame, resolve. He wasn't done. That night, Henry couldn't sleep. He lay on his small mattress in the corner of the one-bedroom apartment he rented above a laundromat, the sound of dryers humming below. The ridicule from earlier replayed in his mind, but instead of leaving him broken, it sparked something deeper. He got up, opened the closet, and pulled out an old photo album. Dust clung to the cover like time itself had forgotten it. Inside were pictures from another life, him standing in front of Dawson Auto Repair, shaking hands with happy customers and smiling beside his late wife Carla, who always believed in him even when he didn't. One photo stood out, a picture of the two of them holding a hand-painted sign, "Built with heart, not just hands." Carla had insisted on that slogan. She used to say, "You fix more than cars, Henry. You fix people's faith in decency." He traced the words with his finger. The world had changed. Small businesses got crushed, bills piled up, And after Carla passed from cancer, Henry had no more fight left in him, until now. The next day, on his lunch break, Henry walked into the library down the block. He hadn't touched a computer in years, but he asked the librarian for help logging in. With her guidance, he searched how to apply for small business grants, how to register a business name again, and how to repair and flip used cars from home. The knowledge came slowly, but Henry had time. Every night after his shift, he stayed, up reading, learning, sketching business plans on napkins, and scrolling through Craigslist listings for beat-up vehicles people wanted to sell for parts. One day, he found it, a 1998 Ford Ranger. No engine, rusted frame, no title. The perfect project. He scraped together $350 from his last 3 paychecks, borrowed a friend's trailer, and towed it to a rented garage unit 10 miles away. The space was small, cold, and smelled like old oil and dreams, but it was his, under. Flickering lights and with cracked knuckles, Henry began to work again. Not for a boss, not for a paycheck, but for himself. The spark had returned. He didn't know how or when it would pay off, but for the first time in years, Henry was building something again, and this time he wasn't going to let go. It took him nearly 6 weeks of late-night repairs and weekend hustle. Henry poured every spare dollar and every ounce of energy into that beat-up 1998 Ford Ranger. Working by the dim light of a hanging bulb and a small heater plugged into a worn outlet, he brought the truck back to life piece by piece. He replaced the transmission with one he found at a junkyard and rebuilt the engine with second-hand parts. His calloused hands moving with the skill of a man who hadn't forgotten what it meant to take something broken and make it whole again. Meanwhile, he still showed up to Wendy's every morning, still wiped tables, still endured the occasional joke or impatient customer, but something had shifted. His shoulders were straighter, his voice had more strength. He had something waiting for him after work, something that belonged to him. One Tuesday afternoon, he finished detailing the Ranger. It looked nothing like it had when he bought it. Fresh coat of navy blue paint, cleaned interior, new tires. It wasn't flashy, but it was solid, honest, and dependable. He took a photo and listed it online with a simple description. Rebuilt by a certified mechanic, reliable, clean title and ready to drive. 3 days later, a young couple drove up from Columbus to see it. Newly married, expecting their first child, and in desperate need of affordable transportation. Henry didn't push the sale. He just let the truck speak for itself. After a short test drive, the couple returned with tears in their eyes. "This is perfect," the wife whispered. "My dad used to drive one just like it." They paid Henry $4,800 in cash. Before they left, the young man looked Henry in the eye and said, "Thank you for not taking advantage of us. We've been burned so many times." Henry simply smiled. "I've been there, just happy to help." After they left, he sat alone in the garage. In his hand was more money than he'd made in months. But it wasn't just about the cash. It was proof. Proof that he still had value, that he still could rebuild more than just engines. He walked back to his apartment that night under the stars, his breath fogging in the cold air, the money tucked safely in his coat pocket. For the first time in years, Henry allowed himself a full, quiet smile. After the Ranger sold, something shifted in Henry's spirit. It wasn't just about fixing cars anymore. It was about reclaiming his identity. Each bolt turned and engine cleaned was a reminder that he was more than a fast food uniform. He was a builder, a craftsman, a man who still had something to offer. With the money from the Ranger sale, Henry bought 2 more used cars, one a dented Toyota Camry with engine trouble, and the other a Chevy Impala with a broken axle. Neither car would have caught the eye of a dealer, but Henry saw them differently. He saw potential. By now, word had started to spread among co-workers at Wendy's. One of the younger staff, Marcus, stopped him during a break. "Hey, Mr. Dawson, is it true you're flipping cars again?" Henry chuckled. "Not flipping. Restoring. There's a difference." Marcus grinned. "That's actually kinda cool." Soon, the small rented garage wasn't enough. Henry used some of his savings to rent a slightly larger space on the edge of town. He brought in a couple. They have tools from storage, patched up the leaky roof, and painted the old sign out front. Dawson Automotive, honest work, fair prices. One evening, his former Wendy's manager, Claire, drove past the new shop on her way home. She blinked twice when she saw Henry outside, polishing the hood of a restored Corolla. The man she knew from behind the register now stood proud in front of a place that bore his name. "Henry," she called from her car. He turned and smiled. "Hey there. I had no idea you were doing all this." "Neither did I," he said with a small laugh. Claire stepped out of the car and walked around, impressed. "You know, our assistant manager's son needs a car. Do you have anything affordable?" That night, Henry sold the Corolla to Claire's contact. Word of mouth took care of the rest. Within months, Henry was doing steady business. Nothing flashy, but enough to pay the bills and slowly step away from Wendy's. By the time spring rolled around, he had officially left the restaurant, though he still stopped in from time to time for a coffee and to check on his old co-workers. Some of them looked at him differently now. Others asked for advice. Henry never bragged. He didn't have to. His life was starting to speak for itself, and yet the true turning point was still to come, when those who once humiliated him would walk through his doors and see what resilience really looks like. It was a warm Friday afternoon in early June when the sleek black BMW pulled into the parking lot of Dawson Automotive. Henry was finishing a routine brake job on a Honda when he heard the engine purr to a stop and the car door swing open with a confident slam. Two men stepped out, laughing, loud, familiar. Henry wiped his hands slowly, his heart calm but alert. It was them. The same two young men who had mocked him months earlier at the Wendy's counter. Their designer sunglasses, their arrogant stride, the same cruel energy in the air. But now, they were on his turf. One of them glanced around and asked, "Yo, this place got a mechanic on duty." Henry stepped forward. "You're looking at him." They froze for a moment, recognition dawning. The taller one, clearly unsettled, tried to play it cool. "Wait, you used to work at Wendy's, right?" "I did," Henry said plainly. "Can I help you?" The second guy looked sheepish now. Yeah, my brother's car broke down on the interstate. Tow guy dropped it here. We need it looked at." Henry nodded. "I can take a look. Keys?" The taller one hesitated. "Wait, you really own this place?" "I built it, from the ground up." They handed over the keys, this time without jokes or sarcasm. Henry examined the engine, diagnosed the issue. Nothing serious, just a blown gasket and some overheating damage. "I can have it fixed by tomorrow morning," he said, standing. $680, parts and labor, the taller man scoffed. "That's a bit steep, don't you think?" Henry met his eyes, steady and unwavering. "You're welcome to find another shop, but I guarantee you won't find better work or a better price." Young man faltered. This wasn't the Wendy's employee they remembered. This was a business owner, a man in control. They paid the deposit without another word. As they turned to leave, the second guy paused. "Listen, man, I don't know. If you remember us, I do. We were out of line back then. You didn't deserve that." Henry offered a quiet nod. "Thank you for saying that." The apology wasn't necessary. Henry had already forgiven them, not for their sake, but for his own peace. That evening, as he turned off the lights and locked the shop, Henry stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching the sunset bleed over the horizon. He hadn't just returned their car, he had reclaimed his dignity. Months passed, and the reputation of Dawson Automotive grew. Henry was no longer the quiet, unnoticed man behind the Wendy's counter. He was a business owner, a man who had faced the darkest parts of his life and found a way to climb out, one small step at a time. Each car he fixed, each satisfied customer, built his sense of self-worth back up, brick by brick. One chilly morning in late October, Henry received a phone call that would forever change the course of his life. The voice on the other end was familiar. Claire, his old manager from Wendy's, had a request. "Hey Henry, I hope you're doing well. Listen, I'm in a bit of a bind. I've got a customer looking for a custom restoration. They need it done by next month. Would you be interested in taking it on?" Henry didn't hesitate. "Tell me more." It turned out the customer was none other than the CEO of a local tech firm. known for having a very high-end collection of classic cars. Henry was nervous at first. This was a step into the big leagues, far beyond the routine repairs he was used to. But there was no turning back. He took the job. For the next 3 weeks, he worked tirelessly on the car, a rare 1965 Shelby Mustang. The task pushed him beyond his limits, requiring not just skill but artistry. Every day after the shop closed, he worked late into the night, sometimes until his fingers bled, carefully restoring the car's engine, interior, and finish. He remembered the old days, when every job he took was his last chance, and he poured every ounce of pride into this one. When the car was finished, Henry stood back and admired his work. It was more than just a car, it was a testament to his journey, to all the pieces of himself he'd reclaimed along the way. The day of delivery, the CEO was impressed. "You've got a real talent, Henry. I'll be sure to spread the word. You've earned a spot in the big leagues." Henry simply nodded. "I appreciate it. I'm just doing what I know." The next week, an article was published in the local paper about Dawson Automotive's sudden rise. The tech CEO's endorsement led to a flood of new clients, and Henry's name began to spread beyond his small town. But even as his success grew, Henry never lost the quiet humility that had carried him this far. One evening, as he locked up for the night, he saw an unfamiliar face in the parking lot. A young man, someone he didn't recognize, approached him, looking slightly nervous. "Mr. Dawson, I've heard about your work. My car's been having trouble, and I don't trust just anyone with it. Do you think you could help me?" Henry smiled warmly and gestured to the door. "Come on in, I'll take a look." As the young man walked in, Henry reflected on the incredible journey he'd been through. From the humiliation at Wendy's to this moment, standing proudly in his own shop, he realized it wasn't just about the cars. It was about the people he helped, the dignity he'd earned, and the strength to keep going no matter how many times life knocked him down. He had come full circle, and now he was the one offering a second chance to others.